All Hallows Eve 1992 saw the release of Shin Megami Tensei I on the Super Famicom. Arguably the game that turned Atlus from making licensed properties and being outsourced work for other companies into a recognized developer and publisher in its own right, with many cult classics under their umbrella. Shin Megami Tensei as a series is often stuck within the shadow of a much more popular, marketable, and approachable Persona series, resulting in its own merits and influence independent of this connection to be overlooked and oftentimes forgotten. I'm an avid fan of the franchise and its many spin-offs, thanks to the timeless themes of faith, free will, societal and religious indoctrination, ethics as defined by perspective, and the corruption and manipulation of people through their ideals, as well as the moral ambiguity and the exploration of individual ethics and perspectives that the alignment system enables. Shin Megami Tensei I is specifically best described as social commentary on Japanese politics and spirituality, through American occupation and influence over Japanese society, nationalism, and the conflicting influence of Western and Eastern values that were held at the time. Fast forward to October 30th, 2022, right after the Persona 25th anniversary, and Atlus announces its intent to celebrate the 30th anniversary of SMT over the course of a year, just like they did for Persona. In spite of all this, you'll have to forgive me for not feeling very excited for the 30th anniversary and expecting nothing when Atlus has given me no reason to expect anything but overpriced merch. In order to explain why, we need to look at Atlus's history with this sort of thing. 2017 was Shin Megami Tensei's 25th anniversary, and in celebration, Atlus re-released Strange Journey with the Redux editions and announced Shin Megami Tensei 5 for the Nintendo Switch. Now, re-releasing a fan-favorite game and announcing a new project doesn't seem like a terrible way to celebrate, but Redux wasn't exactly the most warmly received, with many feeling dissatisfied from the change in sprite work from Kaneko-sensei's to a more generic style, and some of the additions removing the atmosphere that the original had. Meanwhile, despite being announced in 2017, developers clarify that it had only just begun development and that it was too premature for Atlus to even say coming soon, with 5 not releasing until November 2021, and with notable framerate issues, poorly implemented series staples like the silent protagonist, and a terribly placed story to name just a few of many, many fundamental problems with SMT I. Moving on, next we have Devil Summoner's 25th anniversary, which happened in 2020, and it was not even acknowledged by Atlus to my knowledge. This brings us to 2022, which was Persona's now infamous 25th anniversary, which began exciting enough, even if most of the major events were Japanese exclusive. Atlus West had reserved 7 announcements to be made over the course of a year, but in the end only went through with 4 of them. The one before Soul Hackers 2 was Persona 3, 4, and 5, coming to all modern platforms, and the last one being their release dates. Significantly underwhelming as a finale, all things considered. Nevertheless, Persona 25th in the end did give us 4 ports of previous games. The Neo Persona trilogy on multiple platforms, as well as Persona 4 Arena Ultimax, and even an update to Persona 4 on PC. And because Redux was in celebration of the 25th, maybe another port would be in celebration of the 30th. Fans have been speculating on a Digital Devil Saga port since the announcement of Nocturne HD Remaster, and even if Atlus wants to have a mainline SMT as part of the 30th anniversary, there is still the option of Shin Megami Tensei 4, possibly not only with updated graphics, but also with the 2/3 of cut story content that could fix some of the narrative's fumbles. Surely that would be a worthy announcement in celebration of 3 decades for a franchise. What I think a lot of people tend to forget is that a port doesn't just magically happen. It's not a process of putting the source code into a new engine and outputting a new and improved version. Different engines have different ways of reading and rendering code, which can result in unforeseen errors and glitches to occur. It takes time, resources, and staff to port a game, and Atlus has always been pretty modest in terms of staff, so if they want to port something, they will either use their own resources to do so, or outsource to another company to do the port, which Atlus has done in the past, but doesn't seem to have done for the Persona ports, meaning that they were all done in-house. Going by Occam's razor, I'd like to propose the following theory as to why the ports for P3 and 4 are arriving during the SMT 30th as opposed to the Persona 25th. Since development was likely set back quite a bit by the pandemic and lockdowns, the porting of Persona included, Atlus management decided to prioritize P5 as it was the most in-demand, most acclaimed, most polished, and thus most difficult, but also most profitable, and released that in time for the anniversary's conclusion, while P3 and 4 were lower priority that simply took longer to complete, hence their January releases. This is also why ports of P1 and 2 are absent in this celebration, I suspect. They simply did not have the time and resources to spend on comparatively niche entries when compared to the acclaim and fan passion directed at the Neo Persona trilogy. Games that have been in high demand for porting to modern platforms since before the release of Persona 5. It is also worth remembering that Shin Megami Tensei's 1 iOS port was a failure. Shin Megami Tensei 5, despite selling very well, is not exactly highly regarded by fans, and is probably bound by a timed exclusivity deal to Nintendo, and as I mentioned before, the last SMT port, Redux, is also a divisive entry in the franchise. So when taking all this into account, I find it unlikely that a port is going to be one of the announcements for SMT's 30th. Now, a translation of an older game already on the Nintendo eShop in Japan is a bit more likely. The remaster is done, and so all that is needed is to change the script from Japanese to English. If any older games are announced to be released as part of the 30th, then this is what I'd place my bets on, as it is the cheaper and quicker option, and multiple could potentially be done within the year. With the official translation for SMT 1 already completed, and a version for the game available on the Switch in Japan, this one is actually a decently likely announcement, all things considered. Not saying that this will happen, it's just that this is the most likely of the speculated releases that I've seen that I feel are viable to occur. The final potential announcement that could happen, but which I think is unlikely, would be the announcement of a fresh SMT game. As I mentioned before, as a part of the 25th anniversary, Atlus announced SMT 5 as a part of the celebration, and this fueled many to suspect P6 to be one of the intended announcements as a part of Persona 25th. This wasn't the first time that Atlus announced a game early in development either. Persona 5 being announced in 2013 for 2014, but was delayed to 2017, and Project ReFantasy was announced before SMT's 25th, but I, and many others I suspect, completely forgot about, as there hadn't been any major updates, not even the game's name, since then. Compare that to the most recent game that Atlus announced and released at the time of writing and recording. Soul Hackers 2 was announced in February 2022, and less than 8 months later was released worldwide and on multi-platforms. Persona 5 Royal and P3 and 5 Dancing were also released relatively soon after announcements. So I'm going to propose that Atlus is done announcing their intended projects prematurely, something they've been getting flack for years now, and are instead opting to announce them closer to their release. This is why I suspect that Persona 6 was one of the intended announcements and was cancelled because development was simply not far enough along to justify the unveil. Furthermore, Shin Megami Tensei 5 is just over a year old, and Soul Hackers 2 was not even released 6 months ago, and needed multiple patches to fix some of the game's issues post-release. If a new game is in development, then I highly doubt that it's far enough along to be announced after such a short time. Unless it's a case like Raito 2 or Persona 2 Eternal Punishment, and reused a lot of assets from its predecessor to hasten development. I don't think that I am alone in saying that Soul Hackers 3 wouldn't exactly be high up on my wish list, nor would a Shin Megami Tensei 6 if it's anything like Shin Megami Tensei 5. Both of those games feel like they fundamentally misunderstood what made people resonate with previous installments in favor of light Persona aspects haphazardly integrated without care or regard as to how to implement them. Some of which were so bad, so ill-advised, confused, and questionable that if they weren't in the actual games, then I'd believe that an internet troll was trying to gaslight the fanbase. The most notable of these were the social system of Soul Hackers 2 being so barren of substance and bare minimum in execution that it feels like a parody of itself. This now begs the question of what exactly will happen during the 30th anniversary. The first announcement was literally the resurrection of an old trading card game with additional cards from the most recent installments. I think this sets the precedent that at the very least most announcements will be in this vein. Something that the cynical me would call a quick cash grab for overpriced merch, and I've heard that this is the standard for these types of events in Japan. But does that mean that there will be no games, not even the announcements for them during the 30th? Not necessarily. I know that this contradicts what I just said, but literally the day I recorded all of what had come before, and which forced me to re-record the rest of this video, an article for Soul Hackers 2's development went up on Persona Central that actually confirmed that a third game was in tandem development by Atlus's first creative staff. If anything, however, this only raises more red flags than not. Stretching resources so thin was probably one of the factors as to why SMT 5 and Soul Hackers 2 were so lacking in quality and refinements, and so there's not much of a case to be made that this third one won't be lacking in the same regard. Don't misunderstand. I'd love for the next game to be a great one, a new classic that can stand proudly, head and shoulders alongside the best that came before it. But that doesn't change how difficult it is to find reasons for optimism.